Hey guys, welcome to the Smart Venture Podcast. In each episode, we're going to have conversations with some of the top investors, superstar founders, as well as well-known tech company executives in Silicon Valley. We'll have a coffee chat with them to learn their way of thinking and actionable tips on how they build or invest in a successful company. Before we start our show today, I want to make sure the listener, aka you, understand that everything a person say on the podcast only reflects hers or his own opinion, not the show or the company they work at. Our guest today is a co-founder of Palm, a palm-sized smartphone focused on being connected but not consumed with technology. He brought on 3 times NBA champ and MVP basketball player Stephen Curry as a strategic investor and advisor. Prior to Palm, he was the global vice president of Samsung Electronics and former head of design special projects at Google. His name is Dennis Miloseski. Welcome to the show, Dennis.
Hi, Grace. Thanks for having me.
Dennis, you were originally from the Midwest. You had great experiences working at some of the top tech companies in design. To start the show, I'd love for you to tell the story of how you started your career and get to where you are today.
Oh, gosh. Getting into tech, I would say that it was really at a young age, and it didn't start off as tech. I was always curious about how things worked. Growing up, I was the child that would take things apart, try to put them back together again, try to make them work in a better way. Mm-hmm. And it was a curiosity. So I think having that just as an innate quality led to just questioning things, understanding things very differently, how they're built, how they could be made better. So I would say that's how I got my entry into design. It was really curiosity of making things better and how they work, what made them tick. So eventually it led me to a education in design and engineering and how I could bring those two together.
Is there any particular experience shaped how you think and get you really interested in design?
Yeah, I would say, I've always had a fascination with invention, in inventors of the past and those who've created something that seemed very simple, yet had such a significant impact on our lives and how we live them every day. So, going in the past, whether it was the famous inventors of the past, I always had an interest to do a deep study and understanding of why were they approaching a problem a certain way. And that's where I draw a lot of my inspiration in trying to create what's next, not based on what exists today, but how we can improve our lives.
When you were a child, what were some designs you think is cool or you find inspirational?
Yeah, I would say you find inspiration in everyday objects. You find inspiration in many things. We all have our favorite things, whether it's a favorite piece of tech or, favorite clothing that makes us feel a specific way and that's different than anything else. So I don't think I can pinpoint one specific thing, but I would say it's those that help you identify who you are, and in your identity. And that could range from a variety of products, whether it's a pair of shoes or, it's something that you keep for namesake. And I would say it's just broad. I would say the things that I love are the things, I have very few things in my life. I like to live my life in a very minimalist way where it's, those objects that I own have a lot of intent. And through that intent, I get a lot of joy. So I know it's a broad answer, but at least something that's a little more heartfelt.
Yeah, totally. You mentioned that you were a person who likes to take things apart, study how a designer become a good designer. What were some things that you started doing early on in your career to improve your quote unquote technical design skills, say maybe drawing? And how do you strategically acquire the skills?
Yeah, so I would say even at an early age, it was things like drawing, things like understanding the mechanics of how things worked, which led to my interest. Some of those early stories, I've had the benefit of actually meeting a lot of interesting people. So I'm a son of an immigrant, and it was my family. They actually started a restaurant business in the Detroit area, and growing up in that business, it was interesting because I had a chance to interface with all of the customers and at the time we had writers and artists and engineers and those who worked in so many different fields. And I always made it a point to have conversations with people. It goes back to that curiosity of what they do, what is that craft, what makes them different than everyone else. And it was through those conversations, and early on, I had a chance to meet actually some early comic book writers, some artists, and got interested in drawing. And then later, I met some people that were involved in the early computer industry. And as a kid, they would donate equipment as their office would swap things in and out. And the first thing that I did was just get a better understanding of computers and how they worked, whether it was the hardware and taking them apart, to some of the early software and writing some early code to do some of the things that I wanted to do. So I would say it was a variety of things and a variety of inspiration points, but I would say it would, a lot of it was drawn from all those different personalities that I met. And I always gravitated towards the creators, and I've always wanted to have a deeper understanding of their crafts.
I love that you started with chatting with comic book artists. That's really cool. Did you always know that you wanted to become a designer? How did you educate yourself, assuming the internet wasn't popular back then?
Yeah, well, there was no internet back then. Not to age myself a bit, but it was, I fell into a field that wasn't developed yet. In the early days, I knew I had a passion for design. And even though I would say the skill sets that you learn from even drawing and understanding color theory and understanding perspective and understanding all of those things, what it does is it gears your brain really to understand how things come together, whether it's proportional, whether they're designed in a specific way for specific reasons. And then I had this passion for this new emerging thing, which was technology, and more specifically the internet. So back then, I remember it was a class project I did, and they do those career assignments. Well, what do you want to be? And I knew I had a passion for designing things and creating things, but I also had a passion for the mechanics of how things worked. And, I always wondered, gee, is there actually a field where I can study not only design, but how it like interweaves with technology? And back then it didn't exist. I think today when you look at programs around human computer interaction and you look at more detailed disciplines around design, I think those programs started to emerge from, the late 90s, early 2000s. But when I started to study, it really wasn't there. So I had to take a few paths. I had to look at what a computer science background would look like, what a design background would look like, how those two things would come together to allow me to work in a new field. And that new field was really the emerging internet back in those days.
Totally. Back in time, have you met a lot of people who share the same interest? Were you reading books about the computers, or did you talk to local computer enthusiastic people? How did you go about it?
Yeah, I would say in the early days, it was just drawing inspiration from what was out there, what was possible. A lot of the things that you were doing for the first time in many cases. In the early part of my career, I've had a chance to work at some of the earliest internet companies. And what you didn't realize is I was a bright-eyed kid, but at the same time, you may be creating something, but eventually it gets copied and somebody else does the same thing as you. And then that gets copied again. And some of those things become standards. And when it's hard to separate the forest from the tree when you're doing that, because you're just thinking of it as an assignment. But then you're actually developing some of the early standards for how things are done, whether it's on the internet. And if it's well done, then it's definitely emulated and copied by others.
Well, that's really interesting. Have you designed something for the first time and that became a norm?
Yeah, what I like to do in my philosophy, it is really about how do you focus on invention in a way where, one, it's familiar, but there's something new and very interesting, unique about it, rather than sort of look at, there's a lot of sort of groups that think about they're think tank teams. They're thinking 5+ years out. And what I find is there's this sweet spot, and the sweet spot is like if you look at what the future is going to be in the next 12 to 18 months, that's actually very executable. Because in some cases, if you go too far out, you almost bring an element of the impossible into play. It's great to invest in that way. It's great to think about those things. But really, my focus is always around execution, what is actually possible. And that's what I bring into a lot of my work. It's sort of this factor where you look at it, you can squint your eyes, it looks familiar, but there's something to it it's very different. And it enables new kinds of behaviors or new kinds of experiences that didn't exist beforehand. So I applied that throughout my entire career, whether I look at my time at Google and then later at Samsung, where my responsibility was to help create what's next, help help them usher the future of their products.
Yeah, I like what you said about have some sort of familiarity and improve on what is not working. When it comes to design or business, who do you consider as your personal board of advisors? Who do you see as an inspiration, and who do you bounce off idea with?
Yeah, so I guess I draw inspiration from everyone. I think everyone brings a unique experience. Everyone brings the ability to, share a unique insight based on their background and experience. So I wouldn't say that there's an individual or one type of individual that I say is where I draw a lot of inspiration from. For instance, even in the company today, so I have a great co-founder. So Howard is a co-founder. We bounce a lot of things off of each other. We're also very yin and yang in our relationships. We have very unique skill sets in how we approach the business. But at the same time, it's a really great sounding board. When I look at others, our board of advisors are made up of such an interesting mix of people. Whether they're athletes, whether they're individuals that are specifically experts in a craft, and I think you can learn so much from that. So when we look at our team, we're made up of individuals across sport. We're made up of designers, people who are involved in fashion, people who are involved in so many different aspects of life. And I think being able to draw inspiration from each and every one of those individuals allows you to do some pretty unique things.
Totally. When it comes to founding Palm, you mentioned that you and your co-founders are complementary. Both of you are designers. What is it like to work with another designer to found a company?
Yeah, so I think it's a beautiful thing. One is that I think your brains are wired in a very similar way as far as when you're pursuing something to create, and whether you're creating something new, there's such there's an emotional aspect to that when you're creating something for everyone to use every day. And design is such an integral part of an experience, right? So design really drives how something is perceived, how something is used, how it actually benefits their life every day. I would say the relentless focus on customers and the relentless focus on those experiences transcends just design. Design isn't just about pixels and things like that. Design really is about what are the emotional things that something evokes, and how does it bring joy? How does it improve your life? And that's, I would say, the evolution of my career, from starting of, one, understanding how things worked, to creating things to make them better, evolving to how you design in business. So I would say my career path has evolved from, design to product and strategy definition, all the way to business. And because of that, I guess because of the way our brains are wired, we approach problems very differently. I guess in my position as a co-founder and leading a company, I'm involved in various aspects of disciplines that are outside of design, whether it's legal, whether it's looking at partnerships or international trade, whether it's looking at how we do business development. So I would say it's a beautiful thing, because in some cases you may be naive to that specific discipline.
Mhm.
However, you approach those problems with a mindset that's very different than what has already been done.
Mhm.
And I would say, because of that, we've been able to do some pretty incredible things. I think we solve problems, whether it was business relationships, or
Mhm.
how do we solve difficult engineering problems.
Mhm.
And it's just because of the mindset in how you
Mhm.
approach to solve something differently.
We talked about how you pick your co-founder and what you see as your strengths. Prior to founding your own company, you've worked at Google and Samsung. How did you start your career at big tech companies? Their product seems really different. How do you make the transition, and what were some coherent theme between those companies? Samsung and Google have super different products. What are some similarities or differences between the two? And what is the culture and overall experience like working in both companies?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. Yeah, I would say Google and Samsung are very different places. So
Yeah.
that's one thing to
Mhm.
start with. As far as culturally and how the companies are run, I think, when you look at one
Mhm.
versus the other, at the time when I was at Google, it was primarily an internet software company.
Mhm.
They developed services. I was there in the early days to help bring products to market like Gmail and Google Apps.
Mhm.
Uh, so a lot of attention was on that new frontier that I mentioned, which is the internet in the web, and
Mhm.
how would we invest in new ways uh,
Mhm.
to help improve people's lives.
Mhm.
So in the early days, there, a lot of my attention and focus was on
Mhm.
the software services side of the business.
Mhm.
Later at Google, I've always had this innate thing in myself
Mhm.
to create not only something that we see on a screen, but the
Mhm.
objects that we keep in our lives. And I
Mhm.
mentioned this early on, where you have these objects of desire, these objects of joy, these things that become interweaved with our everyday life. So
Mhm.
it was breaking into that physical world.
Mhm.
So I started to do that even at Google at the time when it wasn't necessarily seen as a product company or a company that
Mhm.
creates physical things or
Mhm.
hardware.
Mhm.
I started to invest time in how I could help Google incubate and create in the physical realm, even
Mhm.
outside of it being an internet search engine or an internet app provider. So I would say that's where some of that early interest started at Google, and had the fortune to incubate a lot of great products to help Google move into some new spaces. I was on the
Mhm.
early team that developed the Chromecast at Google. So
Mhm.
I had a chance early on to start thinking about different ways that we interface with content, and how does it transcend just a screen like your laptop or your phone,
Mhm.
and how does
Mhm.
it move into other spaces like the living room. So
Mhm.
um, after that, I really got that deep itch, which was
Mhm.
I have this passion for where the physical and digital come together.
Mhm.
Because when you have the ability to create something holistically, you're
Mhm.
not just creating a piece of software and slapping it on a screen, but when
Mhm.
you can actually shape the physical aspects of a product,
Mhm.
and how that digital experience come together, you
Mhm.
can start to do some magical things. And I think that's where my interest peaked, was, well, how could
Mhm.
I bring hardware and software together? At the time,
Mhm.
I was fortunate because it was a time when Samsung was actually exploding. So they
Mhm.
were in that period the leader in Android. Their business was
Mhm.
starting to grow rapidly, and
Mhm.
they were largely seen as a fast follower then.
Mhm.
So it was basically a period of time where Apple would create something, and then Samsung would come over and develop
Mhm.
something very similar.
Mhm.
And with Samsung, what they were looking to do is invest in creation in a very different way. So they
Mhm.
looked outside of Korea,
Mhm.
and they came to the Valley,
Mhm.
and the Bay Area specifically, and mostly
Mhm.
because of access to talent. The innovation spirit that is
Mhm.
here in the Bay Area is not seen in many places. So
Mhm.
Samsung approached me, and they asked me if I would be interested in opening a new venture for them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And at the time, it was a way for them to create what is next, where they can be seen as a first mover, where they can be seen as a category creator and not just a fast follower. And that was the birth of Samsung Design America. So I opened that office from scratch. And this was at a time to really invest and move in new ways and start focusing on what the next era of products would be for them.
Yeah, that's really interesting. You created something from your imaginations to execute the vision, turn it into a team and creating legendary products like Google Chromecast. Then you built the design team at Samsung. What is the difference between being a designer to leader in design? I assume being a leader, you need to focus on collaborating with other departments, managing other designers, instead of only focusing on design a particular parts. I assume it's a different scope of work. What are the skills required to master the job?
Yeah, so I would say that you bring all of your experiences and competencies in creating things over, and that is how you can truly lead. That's what separates the difference between, let's say, just a manager and those who operate in a very political machine, and those who are seen as leaders, and those who could bring a certain level of competency, experience, guidance, vision, I think, which is necessary to pull individuals in a team together. And I would also say, no matter how large the organization is, there is an ability, even in matrixed organizations, to set up how your teams work and how you can innovate. So even though I was the head of studio and the head of that organization at Samsung Design America, I oversaw and managed engineers and product managers and industrial designers and other visual creatives. So it was this broad stroke. And I would say the thing that was essential was to be able to inspire with a vision and have everybody there feel as if they're a part of that vision, that they're not being tasked to just do something, but you're there to actually shape their imaginations and what is possible, and to challenge those people to do the best work. I would say from all of my teams, I would say every single person on those teams felt that their DNA is in that product. And you can't ask for anything more than that when you are actually not asking individuals to stay late or work harder, do those things. That when people feel invested, they feel that they have ownership in what is being created, and they feel that they're a part of that in a very big way. That takes care of itself. There's countless times where I would be in after hours and people would still be there on their own will because they were trying to solve a hard problem. And I think that's what I like to bring through a lot of the teams that I work with, and that is not only inspire ownership, but also inspire a vision of what something can be. And in some of those early days at Samsung, it was really a new frontier. So we were working on things that didn't exist yet. So there's just so much excitement and energy around what could be, how could we create this, which leads to some just very interesting ways to collaborate and a lot of ideas.
Totally. I like what you said about inspiring people, give them ownership, allow them to own part of the projects. How does that translate into action? How do you actually make that happen? In terms of managing the team at a big tech company, how do you come up with KPI for your team and yourself? How much time do you spend on designing a product compared to collaborating with other team?
Yeah, I think a great way to do it is to make, even though you may be a part of a large organization or team, but carve out just very unique ownership. So, I use the model of what I call a big bet, and so you may have a multidisciplinary team, it may be made up of about 5 or 6 people initially. and it's an incubation team. So I think of ideas in stages where, there are a lot of ideas. Like, for example, back in the days at Samsung, we were working on inventing the category of wearable technology. So when we were thinking about wearable technology, we were starting to dive into the things that made people's lives better through tech. It wasn't, I would say some of the early stories were, I flew to Korea about 45 times, spent a lot of time there. So one is you need to make the world feel small. You need, even though you have teams in remote places, I think having that connection is essential to the success of whatever effort you're doing. But as far as the layout goes, so when I talk about a big bet team, we may have, let's say, 4 or 5 different projects, or let's say different programs. Each of those programs are made up of a product or a strategy leader. In some organizations, they call them PMs or strategists. It's made up of, let's say, an industrial design leader. It's made up of someone who is an expert in design and user experience, in behavioral, in research. So we take this multidisciplinary group. So you have this business expertise, strategy expertise, design and product execution expertise, and they're enabled to incubate, right? To where we use a design methodology and a process that allows us to, one, even though we're a large organization, at the time we spanned over 100 plus employees across 2 offices for my US operations. We were able to create these very small and intimate teams that went after these big bets. And I could spend hours talking about just the mechanics of those teams and things like that. But what it did is it allowed us to make a very big organization feel small. And then there's a graduation point for each of those stages. So let's say these products were starting to get legs, and we were starting to see that we had enabling technologies that allowed us to execute or bring something very unique about that big bet to market. In some of those early days, we were having access to the first curved screens. And when you think of it from an engineering standpoint, or the fact that you have this technical capability, it's one thing. What we were looking at it was, well, how do we design the human aspect of leveraging that technology? So when we curved screens, we wanted to curve them to be to the contour of your body, not necessarily because it was cool tech, but because it actually was more comfortable. It allowed us to actually not have rigid objects, whether they were on our wrist or in other places. So we were able to take these enabling technologies, which were being invented in our R&D facilities, and we were manifesting them in very human ways and in the design execution. And that's what led to a lot of our early design accolades and awards. We swept all of the major product innovation and design awards with some of those products. It's because we took a very human approach to how we created things.
You sounds like a really empathetic leader. So you've worked at big tech companies. Now you're building your own company. Curious, what are something that is transferable from your big tech experience to building a startup?
Yeah, so the fortune of working at big companies is a really great thing, because you really understand just the diversity of talent, the scale of things, being able to bring products to market, whether it was Samsung or Google, what you're creating touches millions of people. And so that gives you an ability really to understand the market, gives you the ability to understand trends. You have this amazing R&D resource where you have some of the best and brightest minds. So you're working very closely with top talent. And when you move into your own business, I don't think anyone is truly prepared for what it means to be a startup founder. You go in with the thoughts, because you basically take everything that you know and everything that you've learned, and you may operate in very senior executive positions in other companies, but until you come over and you see that you're actually responsible for everything, you sort of take for granted the fact that these big companies had the infrastructure in place, whether it was, I have teams that can support me from a marketing capacity. I have other teams that are there. They do unique things. At a startup, you're on your own. So it's really about building a really great team. I would say that's the first step. In the early days, I think what I like to look at, and it goes back to just my philosophies, is where is the world moving? How do we make our lives better? And when I was at Samsung, I was looking at some very interesting trends around the impact that smartphones were having on our lives. So there were times where I did talks where I would get on stage and say that we unlock our phone 50 times a day. Another talk, it was 75 times a day. Then it was 100 times a day. And then it dawned on me that we're actually reprogramming ourselves in how we are as humans, and how we relate to family and friends, and what is driving our attention. So, I did a lot of soul searching, so early in my career, you celebrate the accolades and the things of like shipping something or creating something. And when you see it out in the wild and people are using it, it gives you this amazing feeling. But then after you've done that, at Samsung bringing about 15 products to market, you start to look at the world through a different lens. And I started to look at, well, the things that I do create, how are they actually doing good? How are they making and improving people's lives? So in the early days, even while I was looking at where technology was trending in smartphones, I had a deep expertise in wearables. So brought to market a number of wearable devices, whether they were in fitness tracking, the first 3 iterations of the smartwatch for Samsung. And I was also noticing some interesting behaviors there too, where the premise of creating wearable technology, even in those early days, was how can we encourage the world to look up? How can we have something that keeps us connected, but not entirely consumed with everything that comes with always staring at a tablet-sized device that's on your body at all times? So I would say that's where some of the early inspiration for Palm came. And that was to question, can we live better lives if we're connected but not consumed with technology? So that was some of the early premise. So at that time, it was when my co-founder Howard was also at Samsung. We decided to break off and write a business plan. And really the focus was, could we introduce products to help people live healthier and happier lives? But not sacrifice the things that we love about technology.
I think it takes a lot of guts to quit your comfortable job at big tech companies and enter the startup community. I feel like it's very bold that you're trying to create a phone that's only working as a phone to make people more focused on the task they're working on instead of getting distracted. What do you imagine is the ideal outcome for Palm? Do you picture it replacing smartphone? I feel like almost all innovations nowadays are leading towards building on top of smartphones instead of going against the trend. Curious, how are you planning on execute that vision?
Yeah, I envision a future where we can still have our cake and eat it too. And what I mean by that is that we're going to have a better design future. And what it means is that technology will actually be weaved in our lives in more natural ways, in ways where, I'll draw an analogy. So in the early days of starting the company, one of the inspiration points was the movie Her. I don't know if you've ever seen that film with Joaquin Phoenix, but it takes place in this dystopian future where he falls in love with his AI voice assistant. Now, I'm not saying that we should all fall in love with an AI voice assistant, but the biggest takeaway from that film really was that the way he was interfacing with technology on the go was with his voice. And he would use his voice to send a message, to make a call, to start listening to music, to start a workout. And when you start to look at that, majority of the things that we actually do on the go, we have maybe 200 apps or 300 apps on our phone. However, the things that we're actually using the most frequently probably are about 6 to 8 apps a day.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have that obscure app that you may open up once a month. So the early theory was, could we actually drive our needs on the go by
Mm-hmm.
just using your voice?
Mm-hmm.
So that was really the seed for how we started to imagine like what the future of mobile may look like.
Mm-hmm.
In the film, he carried around a credit card sized device, which Palm
Mm-hmm.
today is a credit card sized device.
Mm-hmm.
And he was able to actually perform all the things that he wanted to do on the go.
Mm-hmm.
It didn't mean that he gave up his larger screen computer or a tablet device or these other screens. So I think we're living in a time where we have very purpose built screens, right? Think of it almost like a distributed screen life. We use large televisions to watch films. And we do that because it's communal. We can watch it with our family and friends. You're not going to watch a movie on a phone.
Mm-hmm.
We have laptops and tablets, and those devices allow us to be more productive and more creative.
Mm-hmm.
So what we were going after was that device that is much more personalized, the device that actually had your essentials, could be lighter weight. So we started in the early days thinking about, what do you need when you're on the go?
Mm-hmm.
What do you need actually to stay connected? And it was really some of the basics. It was communication,
Mm-hmm.
whether it was calls and messaging. It
Mm-hmm.
was your music, which is something that we always did on the go, and how we
Mm-hmm.
stream music. It was access to a camera.
Mm-hmm.
And some of these findings that we had were quite interesting because the wearable market was exploding.
Mm-hmm.
We were starting to see smartwatches catch on, in the third generation. And those devices were primarily focused around fitness and health. The reason that someone bought a wrist wearable smartwatch or tracker was really to track and motivate themselves to actually live healthier lives.
Mm-hmm.
What we wanted to look at was, could we transform the smartphone? Could we actually reinvent what it meant to carry around a big slab, but still have everything that you need in a device that was really mobile? Something that could fit in your smallest pocket, something that could fit in women's yoga pants, something that could go in the coin pocket. The product weighs 2 ounces, something that can go everywhere without being weighed down. So that's where a lot of the early thinking and the philosophy around the product and how it would fit into people's lives would be very different.
Curious about, after you guys launched Palm, what was the first reactions from friends and family and investors when you first pitched them? Also, you did some really amazing partnerships with NBA stars like Stephen Curry and the Verizon team. We had conversations about how your team approached Stephen's team in the past. I thought it was super interesting. And would you want to tell people the story here?
We'll start with how we were able to actually have some really amazing partners. How we were able to get that even done. And I would say it's the beauty of the cold call. and one of the things that a lot of people underestimate is your ability to actually reach out and connect with people. So what I strongly encourage is being bold. I would even look at your past and reaching out and all the interviews that you've done for your books and the opportunities you've created for yourself, is because you never created this artificial fear that there's a barrier of access, especially in the times now. It's just so easy to connect with others. And I guess when we talk about our relationship with Stephen Curry, I guess that started off because we were a Bay Area born company, and we knew that our product fit a very active lifestyle, whether it was through sport or through fitness. So really the focus for us was, well, how do we find the right partners and ambassadors? And our head of product, he was one of the biggest Stephen Curry fans that you could ever find. He named his goldfish Stephen Curry. He's a passionate Warriors fan. And he threw out the idea. He said, well, what about Stefan? And we thought about it and we said, well, he would be great. It's the Bay. We know that he's starting to get into investing. We also know that he would be a perfect fit for the lifestyle of the device. He lives a very busy life. He has to manage his family, his friends, his endorsements, the actual sport itself. So we thought we would reach out to him. And this is where the beauty of a cold call is magical. So we actually reached out to his finance guy. Of course, you can't just email Stephen Curry or send Stephen Curry a tweet and expect him to respond. So we reached out on LinkedIn, and at the time it was we didn't think anything of it because the person that we found didn't even have a profile photo. I think he had less than like 5 connections, and so we thought it was just some fake profile. But after we did some research, we reached out to him, and he responded. And through that response, and at the time the company was Stealth, Palm is a very recognizable brand name, but we made it a point. We were worried about anything leaking at that time that Palm was coming back. So we actually did it in a stealth manner. We said, here's the company, these are the co-founders, this is the type of products they've introduced in the market. And he called us back. So we arranged a call with him. And then what he did was he met us in person just to see that we were legit. And he was blown away. So he was just impressed not only with our backgrounds and experience, but our vision for what the product is and how it's going to help improve people's lives. So he arranged a time for us to meet with Stefan. We met with Stefan. It was at his gym. He was working out. And he arranged a time for us to meet him prior to a flight out. He was flying to New York for a game. And so we only had about 40 minutes with him. He absolutely connected not only with us, but the vision of the company and what we were looking to do. It's something that resonated really deeply with him around technology and how we can help better people and better our lives, families, and kids. So, and that's how it began. And he said, I have to leave. I'm running late for my flight. However, when I get back, I want to meet inside your studio. I want to come to your office. So, of course, he leaves. We're excited. We're high-fiving. Stephen Curry's interested. And then he came to our office. So he stayed true to his word. He texted me, and I looked at my phone and I said, wow, he was looking for parking in San Francisco. So I look at my phone and say, wow, Stephen Curry just texted me. Okay, let me give him some tips on where to park. He came into our office and he stayed for over 4 hours. We actually had to leave. We said, it's getting kind of late, but it just showed how well, when you really understand the motivations of a partner. And, for him, he was looking to really learn the ropes of how a company started from ground zero and how you grow a company. We had a physical aspect, which was the creation of a product. So he wanted to be a part of that process to understand that, as well as starting to expand his investment portfolio. And this was in some of the early days, but we're still Stefan's largest investment to date. So it just shows the belief in the company, the belief in us as founders, and also in our vision.
Yeah, totally. Curious about, you've also done deal with the Verizon team. When you first went to Shenzhen to find the manufacturer, I believe they made an investment in your company. What's a common thread to impress the other person in a short amount of time? I know that you had incredible track record from your past work experiences, but I believe for startup, it's always difficult to make people treat you seriously. What do you say in those calls or cold meetings to make yourself sound legit right away?
Yeah, well, as time goes on, you start to build a history of things that define your career. So accomplishments, and a number of those things enable you to have conversations with individuals, start to develop partnerships. But even outside of that, I would say it's really about connecting with the other person, really understanding what they're thinking about and caring about in that moment of time. What are you doing to help them? And I think this is the simplest thing, but probably the most significant thing that you could do is, and how do you build a kinship with somebody? And whether it's you're reaching out to them cold or you're meeting them first time face to face, is for them to truly understand that you get them. So I would say that it's just an uncanny trait that anyone can have, is know your audience, know that individual, know what drives them, know what they're trying to do, what are they trying to get done, and then you come together in a way to help share how you can help them execute that or improve that. For some of our early discussions, we were a small company. So when we think about the way that we entered our carrier relationships, we're creators, we're innovators, we're starting to imagine the future, but that was actually backed by real data. So we had a deep understanding of the behaviors of how individuals were becoming connected, some of the needs that they had, where some unique innovation could be, where some of the investments that were happening on the carrier side were also happening. So new technologies were starting to enable new kinds of products. So when we first reached out to carriers, it was also somewhat of a cold call. We were a small company. We were about 6 employees at the time, and we were reaching out to the giants. So we were reaching out to the CEO of Verizon. We personally emailed Jeff Bezos, and he responded. So, there are these situations where once you have the ability to pique an interest, when you're able to share certain insights, certain very valuable things that can help that individual grow, let's say, a certain aspect of their business, you're going to get a forum. So for the Verizon call, after we reached out to the CEO, the senior vice president and the head of devices asked for a conference call. And we literally opened up a laptop. We walked him through a vision, our deck, materials, things that made us unique and very different, how we could create new category with them. And that developed into a interesting relationship. Not only that, but a very different way of working. So traditionally in that market, so when you think of carriers or when you think of national retailers, they're picking from a catalog, right? So they'll put out what they call an RFP, a request for proposal. And there may be a number of products that they say, oh, well, I need something in this price tier with this specs that targets this kind of customer. And so they're handpicking what they need to build a portfolio. What we do is very different, since we had such a deeper understanding of where some of their investments were, where their motivations were, things that haven't come out yet. We sort of look ahead. And what we did was we were able to create a relationship that was unlike any of the other OEMs or any other manufacturers. We flew to New Jersey. We met with these core teams. For the first time, they filled an auditorium full of individuals across all aspects of the business, whether it was customer service, whether it was the frontline carrier representatives, whether it was the product strategy team. And we had these intimate sessions. Even though we had a large auditorium full, we were workshopping and doing design sprints, and we were working closely with that carrier team more than any other OEM has ever done in the past. And partially because, one, we were small, but at the same time, it was because they were very interested in a different way of working. And they were motivated by a lot of the things that we were bringing around innovation and doing things differently. So fast forward a bit, when we closed our Verizon deal, we were under 10 employees. We had the largest carrier We had a launch in over 1,700 stores. We basically had a billboard where you had other companies, which may have been 10,000 employee companies that weren't in that position. So again, it goes back to a very different way of working, of connecting with individuals, understanding their motivations. The Verizon story is interesting. Our manufacturer story is also very interesting because initially we approached them to be a manufacturer of ours. And by the time we left the room, they turned into one of our largest investors. So it goes back to how do you inspire a vision and how do you inspire the future?
Totally, that's legendary. Curious how much of it is because of the track record. I'm sure there are listeners who just started their career, didn't have much experiences to demonstrate their ability. How should this approach translate to action for young people?
Yeah, I would say track record helps, but it's not about that. Again, going back to how you connect with an individual. I'll give you an example. I get probably 20 to 30 LinkedIn cold in mails every day from a manufacturer who's trying to sell me something else, a growth marketer who's trying to get me to sign up for one of their services. And it's always that it's difficult to break through the noise. Where I respond is I'll get a message that addresses me. Hey, Dennis, I purchased a Palm. I've used it in this ways. I have a question about this. What that shows is that somebody is not just doing a copy and paste template across 100 things. It's an individual who actually has this genuine and intimate sort of relationship with whether it's something that I created or whether there's a unique insight related to what I made. And then that has my attention. So what they say is there's nothing sweeter to one's ears than their own name, but not only that, a deep understanding of what that individual's goals are and what those things are. So what I say to those that are just starting out and those who are beginning, whether it's reaching out to an individual, whether it's for a partnership or you're inquiring about an opportunity for a position at a company, is truly understand who's on the other end. Let's say you're reaching out to a company, then you have this fear. You're like, wow, I'm reaching out to Google, or I'm reaching out to a Nike, or I'm reaching out to this entity. Where you start to create problems for yourself is that you're imagining them as this, it's the company that I'm talking to. When reality is you may be reaching out to a specific individual, and that individual has certain perspectives, certain motivations, certain goals. And we live in an internet age right now where you can look at what they tweet about, you can see what they post about, you can see those topics that are very interesting to them. And it's how you reach out to them and how you craft that message. So that's the beauty of the cold call, right? And it's not like a blast that's impersonal or anything like that. It's having the ability to connect with somebody, but more importantly, how what you're saying makes their life better or can do something very interesting for them.
I totally agree with you on researching the person, doing due diligence, be authentic and genuine when you reach out. In terms of having unique insights or deep understanding for the other person, I believe it could be hard for someone who doesn't have much work experiences to do. If I just started my career, I don't have much to offer. What should I convey in these messages to approach the potential partnerships?
Yeah, well, in the example that I previously gave, it's building a relationship around something that person cares about. So if it's a product, the scenario I gave was, when somebody reaches out to me and says, I've purchased your device and I have these questions, right? You don't necessarily need a huge skill set to say that hey, I own the Nike Air Force Ones, and this is what I think about them, or in finding the right individual for that. So um, I would say that even if you're not coming to them with the next big idea, it's not really about that. You're starting to build at least the foundation for your career. You're reaching out to either it's like-minded individuals or
Mhm.
brands that inspire you, or those that help you grow.
Mhm.
So I would say that is possible by anyone.
Mhm.
So you don't necessarily need a specific skill set or, let's say, a long list of accomplishments to say that I have an affinity for your product, and this is what I feel about it. Or would you be open if I were to interview you and
Mhm.
learn from you and talk about this? I'm an aspiring student in this specific field. And,
Mhm.
and you'll be surprised, a lot of individuals, whether they're executives, um, it's there's this beauty of giving back and actually helping others,
Mhm.
especially those who have the right sort of motivations and intention
Mhm.
and heart in
Mhm.
that. And you'll be surprised who you'll be able to connect with and build a relationship with.
Totally. Well, thank you so much, Dennis. So last question on this subject is, where do you see Palm going next?
Yeah. So looking at Palm, it's really about the evolution of what it means to be connected but not consumed. So
Mhm.
we created one device, and that device has found home in a lot of amazing segments. We have
Mhm.
parents who are buying it as the first phone for their child. We were written up by Parents Magazine, Parentology. We were the phone to get in 2020 for kids, and they love that because we have such a broad ability to actually impact people in big ways.
Mhm.
So that's a segment for when we look at families and kids. When we look at our segment around those who are looking for just simpler ways to connect and sort of have all the things that matter to them. We're not a device that is just phone and messages. We have your
Mhm.
Spotify, we have your Apple Music, we can run Strava. We were
Mhm.
just written up by Cycling Magazine as the reinvention of the bike computer. And this
Mhm.
article just came out a few days ago. So there's a few paths. I would say our focus is continuing to think about ways, whether it is through a new portfolio of products, new
Mhm.
generations of the existing device that we made, and how we make people connected but not consumed. Um, I truly believe there's a time and place for how we use products and certain technology, and it'll help us improve our life. The past 5 years, we've rewired our brains, the dopamine dependencies on likes,
Mhm.
and all of these things that have changed how we actually behave. You know, it's difficult to actually look at a kid in the eye and hold a conversation anymore because they're glued on the screen so much. So I would say the future holds simpler ways for us to be connected. I would
Mhm.
say more distributed ways, lighter weight ways, which we will be connected, whether it's through audio technologies, wearable technologies, and of course the smartphone, which is the biggest opportunity.
Totally. Well, thank you so much. So we have a little fire round for you before we let you go. So, first question is, what's your favorite book?
My favorite book. Oh gosh, I I don't think I can pick one. I would say it would have to be more around biographies of individuals. I just have a fascination with those that have overcome certain challenges or who've been able to accomplish great things. So I won't give you a specific book, but I'll give you the types of books, and I tend to gravitate to things like that because um, history always repeats itself, and
Mhm.
every lesson in life is can be learned through
Mhm.
other people's mistakes. So
Mhm.
I would say the biographies of inventors, whether
Mhm.
it's a Nikola Tesla or a Henry Ford,
Mhm.
looking at some of the things, those who were challenging, um, the status quo. they were, there was, the famous quote, of a faster horse. And I think that's the type of business that I'm in, where if you sort of look at an object and say, oh, it's good enough, and I can just make it incrementally better, then came the invention of the automobile,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so that wasn't making a faster horse. That was actually completely rethinking that. It was changing the conversation entirely from, well, this is the way we're thinking, but
Mm-hmm.
if you just look this way, this can actually change the world and redefine what we're doing. So I draw a lot of inspiration from stories like that, whether it's invention and other things.
Yeah. Who would you invite to your dinner party?
Who do I invite to my dinner party? My kids, my family.
I love it.
I would say that friends, family is definitely a very important part of my life, and it's the reason I do the things that I do. I look at the products that actually change the way that my kids live their lives and how it improves their lives, and also family and friends. So I'll leave that broad. I know you're expecting, I wish I could have Steve Jobs there or somebody like that. But I think I can read enough about them. I would say that we invent our future, and that's where I draw a lot of my inspiration and creativity from.
Yeah, totally. Who made the biggest impact in your career?
Biggest impact in my career, I would say at the time, he was the CEO of Samsung. His name was J.K. Shin, and he led the mobile division. He basically brought Samsung into the sort of its glory days of being a leader in mobile and technology. And he really took me under his wing. And so I had an opportunity to travel the world with him, and this was meeting very strategic partners, some of the most important things. And it's because he also had this curiosity of how I created and how I approached the market in a unique way. So he would automatically volunteer me as basically someone who would travel with him to help him evaluate relationships and products and strategy. And I would say that probably had one of the most significant impacts on my business career, because I've always seen myself as a creator, an inventor, somebody who makes things. And I would say that was my first step into truly understanding international business, how strategic relationships were made. And it was an amazing mentorship. So it was a really amazing opportunity for me, put in a very unique position, and had a chance to significantly grow in my career. So I sort of moved out of just the executive leader of product and design organizations, and then really started to understand the core aspects of business and running a business.
What was one of the things that you've learned through working with him or doing business traveling with him? What makes a national business successful and what makes a international business successful? What's the difference?
Yeah, I think it gives you a very different perspective on really the blueprint of how large organizations are run. So, when you look at Samsung, it's gigantic, hundreds of thousands of employees, and you have so much at your disposal there. But at the same time, the inner understanding of how things work, whether it's how does the supply chain work, how does the R&D team function, how do we intertwine, product with a marketing organization. So I would say it gives you this bird's eye view of a much more global operation. and how it's run. And a lot of those things, I tried to carry that blueprint over into Palm. So a lot of people ask us, they say, wow, you're a company of 10 people and you made something. And not only did you make it, it's in Best Buy and Verizon, and Stephen Curry is your brand ambassador. How did you do that with 10 people? It's really about understanding how to scale and stand on the shoulder of giants as well. And those are some of the lessons I learned when I was at Samsung and being mentored by JK, is that you can start to emulate the things that work. I guess it's in all aspects of our life. We look at those lessons and we say, wow, I'm not going to repeat that mistake, or I'm going to learn from that and I'm going to do that as well. You don't necessarily have to reinvent everything. So when we were setting up our manufacturing operation, we flew and met with the CEO of TCL at the time. And the purpose of that was to build the infrastructure in a way that we had previously at Samsung. So when we met with the CEO of that manufacturing partner, we had other individuals who were interested in making the product for us. But at the same time, we were working on setting up the blueprint where we could actually stand on the shoulder of a giant. So through that partnership, we're able to manage global scale, have manufacturing capability. And there's a lot of research that went into that. Through that, we basically built the infrastructure that allowed us to execute very differently. We could take a whole other podcast about how we built our business, because I would say the innovation around what we've done is not about a product. It's showing that an 8-person company can close a partner like Verizon, that a 10-person company can actually manufacture a physical product at scale. We did this at a time when we've raised less than $5 million, where our entire manufacturing capacity would have cost us tens of millions of dollars if we went with the status quo. If we went and did things the way that everybody else was doing them, what we have done would have been impossible. So that's where a lot of the design innovation comes into the problems we're trying to solve. How do we position the right kind of manufacturing relationships? How do we get the right agreements in place? How do we do these things? And I've always approached those as a designer, not because I'm a contract lawyer or I know international law, but I was looking at the outcome. I was looking at, how do we get to this goal? Going back to what I said previously, how does it mutually benefit them? And how do you build a relationship that allows you to do something that isn't the norm, that is very different? So that's where, a lot of my previous lessons and understanding how those things work at a global scale, I'm able to bring a lot of that and adapt them to even what we're doing at a startup company, but at the same time achieve some very big things. And that spans not only manufacturing, but partnerships, in business relationships. So there are a lot of different things that you learn that you just reapply. And many have to realize you don't necessarily have to invent the wheel every time you're doing that.
Totally. Dennis, thank you so much for being so genuine and share with us all the knowledge on creating successful business and the philosophy behind the relationship building and partnership building. Please keep us posted on Palm, and we'd love to have you talk about how you scale the business again down the line. Thank you so much.
Seems that the time flew by, Grace, and I'm happy to come by and cover any other topics you're interested in.
All right, that's all we have for today. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Smart Venture Podcast. If you like it, please leave us a quick review and hit subscribe so you don't miss any tips from the experts. If you want to receive our updates, please leave your email at smartventurepod.com. If you want to connect with me, all my socials are Grace Gong GG. Besides LinkedIn, it's just Grace Gong. I'd love to connect with you and let me know your thought about the show. Now, you can also listen to Smart Venture Podcast on YouTube. Go to smartventurepod.com, click the YouTube link on the top banner. Don't forget to hit subscribe and smash the like button. See you next time.